Protests and violence had been going on for a month, and Bahrainis were getting fed up of living in fear. Restaurants were shut, food at home was running out, and schools and offices remained closed. A vast contrast to what life was like at the roundabout. Because Bahrain is such a small nation, with an area roughly the size of Leeds, a relatively small number of protesters were able to cripple the country by blocking a number of arterial roads in the capital Manama. And so the Crown Prince again urged the protesters to engage in dialogue. He proposed principles for dialogue, including a parliament with full vested powers, reflecting the will of the people, fairly demarcated constituencies, naturalisation, combating corruption, state properties and addressing sectarianism.
If any protester in USA chosen to demonstrate in Wall Street for 1 hour, is the government of USA will tolerate to accept to leave them for 1 hour? That's definitely the answer is no. What happened in Bahrain, the protesters occupied this roundabout and the roads and connection to it for a few days. This damaged the economy and damaged the business in Bahrain. A lot of people, they couldn't reach their offices and companies because the road closed.
Bahrain seemed to be on the verge of a sectarian conflict, with armed vigilantes manning makeshift checkpoints, and people feared the country would descend into anarchy. Foreign governments advised their citizens to leave Bahrain, and the UK sent chartered flights to evacuate Britons living there. Many people, however, refused to leave a country which had been home to them for years, and the 17th of March Foreign Office flight for British expats returned empty. One expat living in Bahrain wrote on an online blog, "To talk about poverty here is ludicrous. What other country in the world is tax-free, VAT-free, has free hospitals, dentistry, medicine, education, scholarships for all Bahrainis who make the grade, cheap petrol, groceries, fruit and vegetables, and government-subsidised meat? The frees are endless. Electricity and water bills are issued, but Bahrainis aren't forced to pay, so continue to use these services for free, as penalties or disconnection doesn't occur. They even have their rubbish bins emptied on a daily basis for free, something we dream for in the UK." Protests and violence continued for a month, similar to the riotings we saw in French and UK cities where immigrant communities suffer from higher unemployment. But unlike the UK, where David Cameron says multiculturalism has failed, in Bahrain people have lived peacefully for generations, resisting foreign influences, trying to serve their own agendas. So even when America was accused of standing by and not intervening, Bahrainis maintained that theirs is a sovereign state with its own regional security agreements.
His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of Bahrain,
The violence did, however, result in a large number of economic losses, including the cancellation of the very popular Grand Prix. So the government ordered the clearance of the roundabout for a second time, and again the rule was not to fire any live ammunition, and this time there was no bloodshed. Mushaima al-Sinkis and many others were rounded up and put on trial, and last week they were sentenced to prison for trying to overthrow the government and for having links to Hezbollah. Mushaima was given 15 years in jail. The government had also imposed martial law for 3 months, a state of national safety. It invoked an agreement with other Gulf countries that allowed for the joint forces of the GCC Peninsula Shield to enter Bahrain and safeguard its vital assets like the oil refineries, government ministries, bridges and other sensitive areas. It meant Bahrain's own security apparatus was then free to return the country to some form of normality.
We have signed enough agreements among our GCC countries since 1980. And we have been implementing those agreements when there was a need for implementation. We have signed agreements for cooperation in education, in health, social development, common market, number of agreements. And nobody has spoken about implementing those agreements. It's only people started to talk when we started to apply agreement to protect our country. What I will do with those agreements if my country is not protected?
The many agreements Jamal Fakhro was referring to were further increased when the GCC states offered Bahrain a $10 billion aid package. It's been dubbed the Gulf Marshall Plan. Abdullah Al-Dosari says the GCC troops provided only backup support.
What happened in Bahrain, the army came to the street for protecting the government, protecting the people, the government and the institution, the private sector and everybody around. And they went back to their barracks without firing one bullet.
Despite not being seen on the streets, the very presence of the troops caused uproar, as foreign journalists described Bahrain as an occupied state, and within the opposition groups, many saw this as a justification for bringing in other external forces.
It's exciting the others to get support from outside, because if you are strengthening yourself with the regional influence from the regimes, then you are forcing the others to go the other way. Because if it is legal for you, then why it's illegal for others?
Arab commentators aren't convinced, and many suspect Bahrain could become the next Lebanon, Wifaq the next Amal, and Mushayma's Haq party the new Iranian-backed Hezbollah. However, officials on either side are careful not to use the term civil war. Is Bahrain heading for a civil war anytime?
No way. No. No. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. In the last 3 weeks, I have attended 3 weddings where the husband and the wife are coming, Muslims are coming from 2 different sects. If we are heading for a civil war, if we are heading into sect problem, I would not have seen those 3 marriages in the last 3 weeks.
I'd be interested then to know what the Crown Prince makes of this. His numerous offers for an unconditional national dialogue have been rejected by the opposition. Many people in Bahrain lamented that the moderate groups failed to work with the Crown Prince and disassociate themselves from the violent radical parties.
But it is not easy like you just leave the street and go back to your home and say, I'm not with you. No, you are in the middle of them, but you're still insisting on your reform.
Even though it has now turned violent?
Sorry?
Even though the protest had now turned violent, you still insisted on staying there?
Yes, of course.
Today, Jamal Fakhro insists the offer is still on the table and possibly the only way forward.
We want to start what unfortunately the opposition in Bahrain failed to grasp on the 15th of March, when His Royal Highness the Crown Prince came up with his list of 7 points. And he said, guys, these are only the first step, these are the 7 points, but the sky is your limit. We can put everything on the table.
3 months later and things are quiet. Life is slowly coming back to normal. Businesses have started meeting targets again, and the country is coming to terms with its losses. But security is tight. We're coming up towards a police checkpoint. It's important to note this isn't the Bahraini military here. This is the police and the National Guard. Some people might say that a checkpoint of this kind should have disappeared with the lifting of the state of national safety. But others say that it's a sign of security on the streets, which they need in order for the country to come back to normality. On my last day in Bahrain, I visit a Bahraini family living in the northern town of Arad. My contact Khalid has spent all night at the hospital with his wife, who was beaten up by a student at the university where she teaches. Khairiya is an IT lecturer, a Sunni. She tells me that sectarian tensions in her university are rife and resulted in her being attacked by a male Shia student in her own classroom.
And then he started punching me and hitting me with a book, and then I wanted to stand up so that I can defend myself or something, but he kept on punching me and slapping, kicking, till and he was trying, pulling my clothes up, so I was pulling it down and still, so I was exposed, so I was pulling my shirt down. That's why I couldn't protect my face. That's why I was holding it down, and he was punching me on the face.
This is very much an isolated event, and I hope that it stays that way. I also hope that Bahrainis can appreciate what they have. There aren't many countries in the world where people can feel safe enough to leave their front and back doors open and their cars unlocked. A country where people are so open, friendly and hospitable. That's why you meet so many expats here who've decided to bring up their families and even retire to Bahrain when they finish working. Bahrain has long been the regional example of two different communities living not side by side but interwoven within each other like the colourful threads of a beautiful carpet. In the Middle East, where rival tribes and rival sects and rival religions have so often gone to war, this country has been a sanctuary in more ways than one. It has such a short history of democratic reform, so I'm positive. I think Bahrainis will get through this. But I don't expect it to be easy. The opposition groups mistrust the government and continue to insist on preconditions before any dialogue can take place. And because they fail to disassociate themselves from the radical parties, that mistrust is mutual. Although the GCC forces were never seen on the streets of Bahrain, the fact that they came at all has added another dimension to this situation. But this pearl-rich country is punctuated with hope, a people refusing to cave into sectarianism, weary of what happened when sectarianism hit Lebanon. The main opposition groups still say their supporters are with the government. The deadline to get involved in the national dialogue was extended to allow more groups to submit their proposals. 300 invitations were sent out for people to join the four-pronged agenda, which will include political, economic, social and legal issues. And as national dialogue began yesterday, even the previously hesitant Al-Wifaq turned up. But for it to work, the government needs to address the underlying economic causes of the recent protests, especially in the more deprived Shia villages. The $10 billion aid promised by the GCC should be wisely spent. Modest amounts of money can make such a big difference to this small country. But Bahrain's opposition groups also need to assemble, disassociate themselves completely from unofficial radical parties as well as from regional governments vying for influence here. They have to work with the government to complete the ever-delicate transition of the country into a vibrant democracy. This is, after all, a young nation, the liberal oasis surrounded by richer, more powerful conservative states, a country very much still under construction.